and thank you for being here. I want to start off by underscoring that this week is National Crime Victims' Rights Week, where the theme is expanding the circle, reaching all victims. And thus far this week, this office was a joint collaborative partner in presenting awards to folks throughout Arizona who have assisted with advancing the cause of crime victims' rights. That was on Monday at the El Zariba Shrine here in Phoenix. And our keynote speaker was Meg Garvin from the National Crime Victims Law Institute. And as a point of pride for all of us, the National Crime Victims Law Institute, which provides legal support for those litigating issues of crime victim rights around the country, told everybody in attendance that when she is consulting with others, the first thing she suggests when trying to figure out what to do in a particular matter is to ask the question, what would Arizona do? And that's something we can all be proud of. And then yesterday we had an internal Maricopa County Attorney's Office event where we awarded folks inside and outside of the office who have helped us deliver on our mission and our duty and responsibility to help victims of crime navigate the process and protect and implement their rights. Next, I want to highlight two recent cases, one in February and March, involving counterfeit OxyContin pills that are oxycodone pills, though in a general sense we've seen this in law enforcement with both OxyContin and oxycodone. But in these two particular cases, we were dealing with counterfeit oxycodone pills. They actually were fentanyl, which is incredibly dangerous. Just a few grains of fentanyl, if ingested either through mucous membranes, so that could be in the mouth or through the nose, or even absorbed through the skin, can kill. Last month, it was last month or the month before that, there was an operation in Boston, Massachusetts, where they took 33 pounds of fentanyl off the street that had been smuggled there by the Sinaloa cartel. So it had originally come through Arizona. That 33 pounds there was enough to kill every man, woman, and child in Massachusetts. So I want to underscore first and foremost that this is a public safety matter, that those who are purchasing OxyContin or oxycodone from drug dealers and not through an approved pharmacy or from a script from a doctor, you don't know whether or not you're getting something that really is legitimate opioid medication or if it's actually fentanyl. There are 5 suspects in custody out of those 2 cases. All are facing Class 2 felonies for possession with intent to sale and or trafficking in general for those pills. In one case, it was 4,000. In the other, it was 600. And it was great work on behalf of law enforcement. And if they hadn't been vigilant in the investigation and in the operation to seize those pills, there's no telling how many people may have died as a consequence of using something that they thought was oxycodone, but again, turned out to be the very deadly drug fentanyl. I also want to underscore, too, that this operation now also illustrates why we needed to have a new way of dealing with heroin and fentanyl traffickers in Arizona. The legislature had an opportunity to pass a measure that would have done exactly that and treated these traffickers just like we treat methamphetamine traffickers. But representatives, most notably Representative David Stringer, failed to appreciate the policy change and the difference between how we're treating heroin addicts and those who are suffering from addiction and those who may be selling drugs to further their own habit and are not major participants in either distributing the drugs or contributing to the general supply within our community. That the way to deal with them is different than what we have been. And that policy short-sightedness, I can't attribute to anything else other than just being blind to the situation that we have in Arizona and a knee-jerk reaction to addressing penalties after we addressed treatment and immunity for those engaged in drug use to deal with someone who may have been suffering a heroin overdose, the legislation that came out of the special session. This was the other side of that policy continuum, and the failure to appreciate that leaves law enforcement now without an important tool. And we've seen these 2 trafficking incidents. We'll likely see more. We're continuing to see more heroin being trafficked into Arizona. And I mention that because this is not an either-or issue where either we take a treatment-first approach and a benign attitude to all involved in heroin and fentanyl use, or we take a ham-handed, heavy-fisted approach and seek to incarcerate everybody. That's never been Arizona's approach. This is a perfect illustration of a both-and approach across the entire drug policy continuum, where we treat those who are in the throes of addiction and we try to get them help, and where the coercive authority of the law is in question, we use that to help people get treatment. And then on the other hand, when we look to minimize the supply in our community and we look to address those responsible for the trafficking and distribution of drugs, that's where we use incarceration and we use the coercive and punitive nature of the law to try to protect our citizens. Next, I also want to highlight that this week we officially implemented our Diversion Program Bureau. Throughout the office, both dealing with juvenile adjudications in partnership with juvenile probation, to limited jurisdiction courts, our justice courts, to felony offenders, this office has multiple deferred prosecution and diversion programs. But as we continue to focus on efforts to divert those that we can identify as being most amenable to treatment and programs and services from formal prosecution in order to reduce recidivism, we want to have better data. We want to have a better way of ensuring that our provider partners are doing the best they can in order to keep people not just from an instant prosecution, but from coming back into the criminal justice system. We wanted to be able to take a look at all those programs and track the data and assess their effectiveness. Well, with all of those spread out throughout the office, that made that effort really difficult. So we've placed all these programs now from a monitoring and a management for implementation standpoint within the Diversion Program Bureau. Prosecutors are still reviewing cases and still making decisions based upon all the factors that usually go into whether or not someone is eligible for a diversion program. This is just the program management on that back end. And Patty Cordoba is the Diversion Program Bureau Chief. And of note is that she has a master's in social work. So yes, a conservative Republican elected prosecutor has hired someone with a master's in social work to oversee diversion programs. I want to underscore that because this effort should not be characterized as progressive or conservative. This is what prosecution offices are doing in the 21st century to make sure that criminal justice resources are being spent and going in the direction of reducing recidivism and distinguishing between drug users, those in the throes of addiction, from the other end of the spectrum where we have the repetitive felons and the violent offenders who should be in prison. And that's going to continue to be the focus of this office. We'll just be able to do a better job at making those distinctions and tracking how successful we are in doing so. Next, an update on the mosque vandalism. This office has filed a sentence enhancement with the court alleging that this was, in fact, a hate crime. Arizona does not have a hate crimes statute per se. Instead, what our sentencing statutes do is it allows a court to consider increasing punishment in any given case where there is evidence of malice towards a specific individual or group. And there is a list of particular characteristics of individuals that if someone exhibits malice against them on that basis, we then as prosecutors can present that information to a judge and seek to increase punishment. I would underscore too that in this particular case it doesn't appear that the defendants have any criminal history that would make prison mandatory for any conviction. But nonetheless, in order to make sure that we're able to communicate with the court about the totality of what happened, we have filed that sentence enhancement. Next, with tax day coming up, the next day we're going to have on April 16th, Monday, Shred-a-thon. And so after you've spent that entire weekend preparing your taxes, I'm sure you will have boxes of documents that you no longer need to keep in order to safeguard you from identity thieves or those who would misuse that information if you just threw it away in the trash. You now can take advantage of our free Shred-a-thon event, and that is at the International Paper Facility at 301 South 30th Street in Phoenix. Each vehicle can have up to 15 bankers' boxes of documents shredded for free. This is a partnership with International Paper and Channel 5. Our volunteers from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office will be on hand. Shredding will start at 4:30 a.m. and will be there till 7 p.m. So you can finish your taxes, and if you stayed up all night to do so, just load up the banker boxes into the car and drive right over and get them shredded for free. Next, a couple of cases of community interest to highlight. In State v. Leroy Christopher Orbeck, last name spelled O-R-B-E-C-K, was sentenced to 25 years for attempted second-degree murder, sex trafficking, child prostitution, attempted sexual assault, and aggravated assault. Officers had responded to a call of minor girls being used as prostitutes inside of a motel room. The defendant was found with 2 minor victims who admitted to being trafficked by Orbeck. Both victims disclosed that they had also been sexually assaulted by the defendant. One of the victims had actually become pregnant with his child, and during one violent incident, he said he no longer wanted the child and beat the victim with the intent that she lose the baby. This illustrates how violent, perverse, and degrading these individuals are who participate in sex trafficking and incorporate minors into their evil enterprise. And it needs to be underscored, and this office will continue to seek the most severe sanctions we can using the laws that we have in Arizona, which were updated after the governor's Human Trafficking Task Force. And in this light, too, I'm very grateful for the work of the FBI and the federal government in doing their jobs and shutting down Backpage.com. That was readily recognized and known as the world's worst place for the trafficking in children and women. Will that conduct go away overnight? No, but there is no reason why anybody should have been profiting from that and through their advertising either. So again, in this case, Leroy Christopher Orbeck, or B-E-C-K, received a 25-year sentence for his conduct in trafficking 2 minor girls and sexually assaulting them as well. Next, State v. Jerry Mathis. Mathis was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of release after 25 years for first-degree murder and then 15 years for attempted first-degree murder. He was also sentenced to 15 years for drive-by shooting and 11 years for aggravated assault, which will be served concurrent to the life sentence imposed. Police had received multiple 911 calls about a shooting at a Phoenix nightclub. Local hospitals then reported receiving multiple gunshot victims, with one who died. And then another victim who had been severely injured was able to help identify Mathis as the suspect. And so, again, Jeffrey Mathis, for that shooting, has been sentenced to life in prison. That is the information I wanted to share specifically. What questions do you have? Ah, yes. Okay. And thank you for continuing to give me information as I looked at you questioningly. This particular case is noteworthy in that this may be the first time we have been able to indict somebody using familial DNA. And in this instance, it's the ability to identify a potential suspect through the DNA of a family member. And then after that, law enforcement was able to confirm the DNA evidence. This also reflects law enforcement's continuing willingness and ability to incorporate contemporary forensic science in helping us solve cases and then be able to seek prosecution. So it's noteworthy in that respect, Megan, and I think that this particular case is also worth following through resolution because of how innovative the law enforcement techniques were in being able to track this person down and the type of DNA evidence we were able to use. Any other questions? All right. We have not received a submittal yet from the police department, and that's the only update I can offer at this point. Is that no submittal has been presented to us yet.
Are you working with them?
We've been in contact with Buckeye Police. In fact, contact was initially made where we were talking back when he first went missing. And so we've been in communication off and on all along. Obviously, the most recent discovery of Jesse's remains provided another opportunity for us to have a conversation, but we haven't had a submittal yet.
So just waiting for now?
Well,
the office can't do anything as far as just gotta wait?
Well, and yeah, I mean, so now talking in general terms, there could be work that still needs to be done in order to prepare a case for submittal for us to review it for prosecution. And bear in mind that the investigative phase of a case can involve a whole lot of work that is independent of the prosecution part of the phase. And even over the course of an investigation, law enforcement can get to a point where, and I'm speaking in general terms, this has absolutely nothing to do with this case, but law enforcement may need to do continual work in order to establish probable cause to be able to make an arrest. And in conversation with prosecutors at that point, though, we may let them know that you may have enough for probable cause to make an arrest, because that's law enforcement's decision to make. But we don't have enough information here that would actually allow us to then seek an indictment or file a charge. So oftentimes you may get to a point in an investigation where the public becomes aware that the investigation has reached the stage maybe where law enforcement is able to identify a suspect, or in some cases they go ahead and make an arrest, but that doesn't mean that the case is going to be submitted right away to a prosecution agency. There may still be additional work that needs to be done, and that's where our communication comes into play too, and working with the police department and letting them know whether or not they've got the case to a point that we can actually review it for a charge. Any other questions? Okay, thank you all very much.